Welcome back. You're watching Gravitas. In Pakistan, the army has launched no less than 12 operations in the last 15 years, focusing on militancy in the tribal belt. In this next report, WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief Taha Siddiqui takes a look at the effectiveness, success and fallouts of these operations. Take a look.
Since 9/11, Pakistan's tribal belt has seen an influx of foreign militant groups, including Afghans, Arabs and Central Asians. Under General Musharraf, Pakistan struck peace deals with these groups initially, but following foreign and domestic pressure, the military launched its first operation called Operation Al-Mizan from 2002 to 2006. However, little success was achieved from that operation, given that in 2007, Pakistan saw the merger of different militant groups under the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, a deadly terrorist group that continues to wreak havoc in the country. Following this merger, the Pakistan Army launched the Rahe-Haq operation in Swat Valley in 2007, which had been overrun by the TTP. General Pervez Musharraf was ousted from power in 2008, following which a civilian government which came into office launched a series of military operations. The army launched 3 operations in 2008, one in the Khyber agency called Sirat-e-Mustaqim against the Lashkar-e-Islam, a TTP allied group, another in South Waziristan against the TTP itself, and one in the Bajor agency also against the TTP. By this time, Swat was once again under Taliban control, and in 2009 a second phase of army operations was launched called Rahe-Rast, followed by Operation Black Thunderstorm, which finally cleared the area of the militants who escaped to neighboring districts and across the border in Afghanistan. 2009 saw another major military offensive in Mohmand agency, forcing the militants from there to flee to Afghanistan too. It is believed that this group, now known as Jamaat-ul-Ahrar, is orchestrating the current wave of terrorism in Pakistan. 2009 to 2011 were the years when Pakistani public saw the worst backlash from terrorist groups, with bombings a daily routine. In 2011, an escalation of attacks on the civilian population in Kurram agency saw the military moving in there too and launching Operation Koh-e-Safed. By this time, the Pakistan Army was involved in military operations in almost the entire tribal belt except for North Waziristan. And in 2014, the Pakistan Army launched Operation Zarb-e-Azab to eliminate safe havens of terrorists there. Despite these 11 operations in the tribal belt and adjoining areas, militancy continues to haunt Pakistan. And now the army has launched its 12th operation called Raddul Fasad, which it says will be focusing on getting rid of militant groups based in Punjab. Many feel that the previous operations failed to achieve any results since they were only eliminating the terrorist group's infrastructure and not their ideological bases, the epicenter of which is believed to be in Punjab. Taha Siddiqui, WION, Islamabad.
So to talk more about those 12 operations in 15 years, we're joined by our Bureau Chief Taha Siddiqui from Pakistan. He did file that report for us. Professor Ijaz Khan of the Peshawar University also joins us right now. And of course, Michael Kugelman, Senior Associate for South Asia, also joining in on the program. Thank you, gentlemen, for speaking with us. Taha, I'm going to start with you. You brought that report to us. What are all these operations leading to in terms of results?
Operations the last 15 years and somewhat of partial success in some areas. I've traveled across the tribal belt and in Swat Valley and across Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where these military operations have been launched in the last 15 years. And I mean, I've seen almost all of the region, and in my reporting, usually it's the military that allows access to most of these places, and otherwise you cannot go independently. So that gives you a fair idea of what the ground situation is. That despite the fact that the military has been engaged in these confrontations in this conflict with the Taliban, it is yet to completely clear out all areas. For example, I mean, Swat, for that matter, has been cleared. Khyber Agency partially has been cleared. Mohammed Agency partially is cleared. North and South, no independent access, so no independent verification of the claims that the military does. So the military is engaged, and it seems to be, there are complaints also that we hear about from the military circles about the fact that it's at a stretch in the tribal belt, and sometimes it talks about handing over power to the civilians. But as of yet, its primary job to secure the area, to clear it out of all sorts of militancy and zero militancy policy that we should see is not really happening on the ground, and because of which these networks, these infrastructure get destroyed, and then we see them resurging elsewhere across the tribal belt because of the fact that they get support from other militants which are not on the government's radar or the military's radar, or the military looks away, namely being the Afghan Taliban, the Haqqani network. So because of this, the success of these operations is quite questionable because the military is engaged in such a long conflict, and as of yet we haven't seen any concrete results.
Right. In fact, Taha, if you look at the numbers, 12 operations in 15 years seems to show some sort of commitment by the military toward rooting out terrorism. But I'm going to go across to Mr. Kugelman now for more on that story. Mr. Kugelman, the US has tried similar strategies in Afghanistan, but the results are there for all to see. How do you look at all the operations being conducted by the Pakistani military when it comes to rooting out terrorism?
Well, I mean, I think that these military operations over the last decade plus were essentially superficial. As we've heard, they went after terrorist groups that targeted the Pakistani state, particularly the Pakistani Taliban and its allies. And in that regard, one of the more recent operations, the one in North Waziristan, known as Darbi Azam, that one did achieve a level of success in the sense that terrorist violence numbers did go down significantly in Pakistan over the last 2 years, and it was launched in June 2014. But of course, as we've discussed, I mean, there were limited benefits from that operation. One problem is that a number of the militants in North Waziristan were essentially pushed into Afghanistan, or they fled into Afghanistan, where they've been able to either stage attacks in Afghanistan, or they've been able to essentially get themselves put together again, rearmed, reloaded, and ready to carry out new campaigns of attacks inside Pakistan. So, the spate of attacks that happened in Pakistan recently was, in my view, a consequence of the fact that you have a number of militants that were not knocked out or not destroyed, and were in a position in Afghanistan to get themselves put together and to stage more attacks in Pakistan. And of course, these Afghanistan-based militants have plenty of help inside Pakistan. And I think one of the big failures of these earlier these counterterrorism offensives is that they've largely been targeting the tribal areas. And as we know, the tentacles of terrorism extend far beyond the tribal area in Pakistan. Karachi in recent years had an infusion of Pakistani Taliban troops going in there. They've been in many other places as well. But at the end of the day, though, none of these counterterrorism offenses will succeed, including this new nationwide one that was just announced. None of them will succeed unless they deal with the broader problem, and that is the ideological drivers of terrorism. It's so easy to kill terrorists. It's so much harder to kill the ideologies that fuel them.
Michael, stay with us. I've also got Professor Ijaz Khan of Peshawar University joining us on the phone line on that story as well. Professor Khan, what do you make of these operations? Do you feel that they're working in the right way for Pakistan?
Which observation? I could not hear the other person talking very clearly. Can you give me a summary?
So if you can hear me now, just wanted to know what you make of these operations that Pakistan has conducted. Do you feel that they are working in the right vein for the country?
Pakistan.
Okay, we seem to have lost our connection with Professor Khan. I'm going to try and get back to him in just a bit. But Taha Siddiqui continues to be with us, as does Michael Kugelman. Taha, do you get a sense that every such strong move is responded to with a regrouping of the militants in a different name? We've seen that happen before in Pakistan. Let's have you comment on that.
Well, definitely, we've seen that with other militant organizations. They've regrouped and they've come back with a new name and under a new name, and the previous one is banned, but they operate under a new name. Not also just that, but like, for example, in Swat Valley, when we saw the 2009 operation, Fazlullah, who is now the chief of Pakistani Taliban and is based somewhere outside in the Pakistani tribal belt and the Afghan tribal belt, he moves around. Fazlullah escaped during military curfew from Swat Valley, right in the middle of that. I've been to Swat a few times to report, and I've been to the village where he was and where he was operating his Taliban sort of kingdom in Swat. And people there, neighbors there, eyewitnesses there say that they saw him leaving and getting out while there was a military curfew outside. So it seems that the strategy of the military when it gets into an area is to clear them out of militants and push them out to another part where they become a problem later on, but not really go after them in the sense. So that's also another problem that we see, besides the fact that definitely these are all foot soldiers in the tribal belt, and the masterminds or the ideologues are present in elsewhere in Pakistan, and those have not been dismantled at all.
Right. Taha, stay with us. I'm being told that Professor Khan is back with us on the show. Professor Khan, I hope you can hear me this time around. I want to take this question to you. The Pakistani establishment has been accused in the past of having a duplicitous policy when it comes to terror. Do you feel that the proliferation of terror in the country is a manifestation of that policy? And should the government be, therefore, doing things differently?
You see, the problem with Pakistan is that it wants to take one step forward and then two steps backward. Then it is really selective in it, and it is reluctant to go all out against terrorism, against terrorist groups, because it is mixing counter-terrorism within Pakistan, then its relations with India and its issue on Kashmir, that has become very difficult for Pakistan to totally disconnect these things. And then for the past so many years, I mean, much before since 47, but even before that, but in Pakistan, a certain mindset has been created. And Pakistan also fears that if it goes all out against these groups, there may be a backlash which it will not be able to handle. So it's a question both of capability and willingness. Its policy on Afghanistan, it wants to have a controlling say in Afghanistan, so it is reluctant to really go all out against those Taliban or those terrorists who are active in Afghanistan. Because they think if they lose their friendship, they would have no friend, no one left in Afghanistan.
Right.
Then inside also, there are different groups, and why there is international pressure or there is some serious terrorist activity inside Pakistan, they take certain action, but against foot soldiers and selective targets.
Okay, let's talk about that international pressure a little bit. Michael Kugelman, the United States has partnered Pakistan in the past in combating terror, even by organizing several joint operations. Do you feel that that partnership is set to continue? Will the U.S. agencies be advising on these operations?
Well, I mean, that really depends on how much attention this new presidential administration is going to give to Pakistan. I really don't think that Pakistan is a major priority for the Trump administration and its broader foreign policy calculations. That said, when the White House is ready to turn to Pakistan, I would like to think that it's going to want to cooperate with Pakistan to the extent possible to deal with the terrorism problem, because, as you know, Trump came to power, pitching himself as very tough on terror. He has a very black and white view of terrorism. He would not have any tolerance for Pakistan's wishy-washy position on terrorism, which, as we discussed, generally involves, wanting to crack down on some terrorists but not others. So Trump, I think, will come out punching, so to speak, in the sense that he will want to have the United States help Pakistan to the extent that it can in dealing with this terrorism threat as it remains. But certainly, Trump will not have any patience for this idea in Pakistan that some terrorist groups are simply not to be dealt with. The Haqqani Network and Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, groups like that. So it'll probably lead to some frictions more than anything else. But to the extent that the U.S. government can partner with Pakistan to deal with its terrorism problem, I'm sure it'll want to do that. But again, I just don't think that at this point in time, the Trump administration feels like Pakistan is that much of a priority. Now, you made a good point before that for many years the U.S. has been pressuring Pakistan to, quote-unquote, do more about terrorism. And I think that for Washington, the ideal time for the Pakistanis to have launched that operation in North Waziristan would have been when U.S. forces were still in Afghanistan in great numbers, because then they would have been there to intercept militants going across the border from North Waziristan into Afghanistan. They could have engaged them and dealt with them then. There's a lot of disappointment and unhappiness in Washington that when that operation in North Waziristan was finally launched, by that time, the U.S. combat force was on its way out of Afghanistan, and now there really isn't the capacity inside Afghanistan to deal with all of these militants that have poured into Afghanistan from Pakistan in recent years.
Taha, if I can come to you with a little bit of both of what the professor said and what Michael said. Michael saying Pakistan's wishy-washy stance on terror. The professor saying that mixing counter-terrorism with issues related to India and Pakistan are basically doing no good for Pakistan's fight against terror. But how easy is it for the two to be divorced? Can Pakistan really wrest the conversation away from India and Kashmir and tackle terror? Or has this become too much a part of the way Pakistan has been addressing issues of terror and counter-terrorism for the past God knows how many years?
Well, we've seen that Pakistan in the last few years has now even started talking about the western border, which it shares with Afghanistan, in a similar manner, in a similar narrative that we see of the eastern border, which it shares with India. And this is in the sense that, for example, now we get the military circles here in Pakistan saying things like the Indians are influencing the Afghans, and the Afghans are coming through it's the Indians in the Afghan influence that is coming through the Pakistani Taliban or other militant groups. They're funding them. They're the ones. Even though the reality on the ground is the fact that in Afghanistan, where these groups are based, which Pakistani military actually pushed them out there because they didn't manage to eliminate them. They were relocating some of them. Amidst that, the relocation, usually the good and the bad Taliban, they go together, and we've seen relocation happening in, for example, from North Waziristan, from South Waziristan, in other parts of the tribal belt, and then relocation happened to Afghanistan. Now, what the Pakistani government has been doing, or the Pakistan military has been doing, is that it's been supporting one sort of militant, or looking away from one sort of militant, which is the Afghan Taliban. And because of that, Afghanistan has weakened, the rate of government there has weakened. And now these very militants, which Pakistan was going after, are taking advantage of that weakening of the Afghan government and sort of regrouping there, recuperating there, and launching attacks against Pakistan. So in a way, this has come in a full circle if we see how things are. And Pakistan is not realizing that still. There's this sort of denial or sort of like deflection in Pakistan that every time a terrorist attack happens, it's basically because of Afghanistan. So why don't we close down the Pak-Afghan border? Why don't we harass the Afghan refugees? Why don't we blame India? But never of an internal review, sort of a situation that we see as to where our policies, the Pakistani policies have gone wrong.
All right, we're running out of time on the show, unfortunately, but thanks again to all my guests who've joined in and spoken to us about that story that Taha Siddiqui brought for us. Taha, thanks for being here. Also, Michael Kugelman and Professor Khan of Peshawar University. Appreciate all of you giving us the time here on the program. We're going to have to wrap up Gravitas on that note for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us here on WION. We'll be back with more news and updates after this very short break. Do stay tuned.